Welcome to session number 9, where we'll hear a captivating keynote from Insight Partners Managing Director Lonne Jaffe, who will share an investor's perspective on the latest AI technology developments, the challenges ahead, and the known unknowns shaping market leadership and long-term value creation in the year to come.
A compact world in our hands.
Thank you. My name is Lonne Jaffe. I'm one of the managing directors at Insight Partners. So I joined Insight about 7.5 years ago. I used to be CEO of a data infrastructure software business, an Insight portfolio company that was called SyncSort at the time. And at Insight, I've had the privilege of working on some of our more interesting, deeper tech machine learning infrastructure investments. So companies like Deci AI and Run AI, both of which got acquired by NVIDIA earlier this year, or had announced acquisitions. And then I've also worked on some of our AI application investments. So for example, FeatureSpace, which is issuing bank fraud detection and financial crime using machine learning. And they had an announced acquisition by Visa a few weeks back. So I'm not going to go through all of the discovery of penicillin-like things that happened in 2017 that I talked about last year at the ScaleUp AI event. But my talk is online if you do a search for my name, and I go into more detail there. So if you're interested in that topic, you can find it, and you can even slow it down to 0.5x if I'm talking too quickly. A couple points I do want to highlight, though. So one is the one way we've been thinking about what AI is a new way of creating software. So in the old days, what would happen is you would sit in front of a computer, and you would use your fingers to type on the keyboard, and that's where the software came from. And then this first generation of machine learning systems, what would happen is the machines would write the software. So data would go into the machine, and software would come out. And that software could often do things that a human could not do, like identify cancerous polyps from a colonoscopy video at massive 1,000 scale, like thousands of instances at the same time, or fraud detection at global scale, recommendation engines like Netflix or Amazon. We have portfolio companies that can do cybersecurity triage. So these were things like prediction, recommendation, and classification. And then after the 2017 systems came online, you started to have two important changes. One was these systems could do new things. They could do, I've been calling them systems of creation. They could do things like write blog posts. We just had our AGM, our big annual limited partner event. And I did a live demo of advanced voice mode. How many people have used advanced voice mode here? So it's in the ChatGPT Enterprise and ChatGPT app. If you have kids especially, I recommend trying it out. But I talked to it in French. It talked to me back. I talked to it in Japanese. It talked to me back. It gave me coaching because I'm not very good at either of those languages. I was able to get it to whisper on stage and to talk like in a couple of different accents. So that's not a thing that the 2012 era prediction systems could do. So it has new capabilities, but it also is very different in that you didn't have to hire hundreds of machine learning engineers and build out massive data pipelines and organize your data in order to use it. It was basically provided over the internet like electricity from the frontier lab providers. So that has a big impact from a software investing perspective. And what it's been doing is it's been driving down a large number of different kinds of costs, and it will likely continue to do this. For example, let's say you're a senior partner at a law firm, and there's a type of legal task, like a briefing document that gets written. And today, that briefing document requires about 8 hours of work from a $1,000 an hour attorney. And then you try the new O1 model from OpenAI when it gets released shortly. The O1 preview model is already out. And let's say it can create that legal brief instead of 8 hours and $1,000 an hour, so $8,000, it's able to happen in, say, 15 minutes, including prompting, and it's a couple of dollars, and it's better. Not the same, but actually better. So that kind of cross-industry price decline does a couple of things. One, you have this phenomenon where, OK, so what happens? Do you capture this as consumers? Like, who captures that value? Do you capture it as higher gross margin? Does it quickly get competed away because everyone else does that? And if so, what is the elasticity of demand? That is to say, in software, we frequently have the prices decline and the markets expand. And especially in technology, when that happens, you can often have much higher bottom line gross margin bottom line margin because you have this phenomenon whereby you amortize fixed costs over more revenue. Or is it like the corporate logo redesign industry, where when the price goes down, there's no increase in demand. The demand elasticity is very low elasticity. And so what will happen instead is the addressable market can get vaporized or captured by the end consumer as consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is money the customer would have spent, but now they don't have to because the thing is free, right? Google search caused a lot of things to go down in price, and then the customers capture that as consumer surplus. And then what do they spend that money on instead? So these are all very interesting things that you can map out sector by subsector, and we've been doing a lot of work in this space. So I've organized the presentation into 3 phases. These are time-based phases. So you can think of phase 1 as like over the last year until like relatively recently. And 2 things that I talked about last year that have certainly been happening is, 1, we've been seeing a relentless amount of capability come out of the frontier labs themselves. And this is not just models that have application-like capabilities, right? They can respond to patient questions in a way that expert human physicians will rank as higher quality in many ways and more empathic than other expert human physicians. But they also have infrastructure capabilities that they're shipping. They're shipping evaluation tools. They're shipping embeddings APIs and all sorts of other scaffolding and frameworks. And so this has made it tricky for startups because, 1, you're building on a chassis that's constantly changing, right? Even the product leaders at the frontier labs themselves who are building products like Artifact and Canvas and things like that, they don't know what the products are going to be able to do in a month or 2 months. Neither do the researchers who are training the model. So it's very hard as a startup to build on that, right? The model, the people at the labs will say, well, design your products in such a way that you're really excited on OpenAI demo day about all the new capabilities that are coming out, which is good advice, right? As opposed to designing it in such a way that it fills in a gap so you're worried about getting disrupted. But it's easy to say that. It's much harder to actually do it. And then the other thing we're seeing is because this technology is provided over the internet like electricity, instead of you don't really have to do the AI part as much yourself, we're seeing incumbents ship their generative AI features very quickly. The frontier lab space has been very interesting from a history of technology perspective. I don't know of any scenario where we've seen this much capital flow into this many different kinds of companies. But a couple of points I want to make. And I'd like you to try to keep 2 things in your head at the same time. One is that it's possible for there to be an enormous impact from all of this on the world of software and software investing on one hand. And 2, some investments could turn out to be disappointing. Right? So that does not imply, like, the rules of business have not changed. Right? You still need to have moats and defensibility, and you need to have operating leverage and durable financial models and things like that. We have an interesting perspective on this because we have hundreds of portfolio companies. We talk to thousands of prospects every year. We have the Insight Ignite program, which talks to hundreds of buyers at large multinational corporations. And we get a visibility into what they're building and what they're building on. And one thing I can say is there's an enormous amount of, I'll call it market share, from the scaled players on the left here. That is to say, actually, up until very recently, it was almost 100% market share within our portfolio just with OpenAI in its various incarnations, including private Azure instances and the like. Recently, we've seen more diversity across. We have like Quantimetric. You saw Mario earlier today. They're built on Google Gemini. One of my portfolio companies, Glia, is built on Anthropic on AWS Bedrock. They have a suite called Cortex, which is really powerful Gen AI features that are on top of their co-browsing in financial services and other regulated industries, and they have a call center product as well. And then we're seeing some companies experiment and work with Llama 3 from Meta. And then you have xAI, which in 122 days built the largest GPU cluster in the world. From the day the first GPU was shipped to the facility to when they started training their model, it was about 19 days. So they're definitely a live player. Then you have all the hyperscalers are also training their own models. So Microsoft, AWS, all the hyperscalers in China as well. You have some what I'll call vertical foundation model players. In general, what we're seeing is the specialty foundation models in industry verticals are very quickly getting outclassed by the more general foundation models in those specific verticals. Right? So you'll have like a company will train a financial services foundation model on financial services data that they have, and GPT-4o will do a better job at answering questions in that domain. But there are some exceptions, like our portfolio company Profluent does protein design. So the tokens are amino acids instead of letters or videos or pictures. And the amino acids, so you can give it a protein that you know will fold folds in a specific way, and it will generate other proteins with different amino acid sequences that will fold in a similar way. Right? So that's a different enough thing than generating text and images that it's what Kevin Scott from Microsoft has been calling making something go from being impossible to possible, but still hard. And that can lend itself to it being a startup because you can have this dynamic whereby it's hard still. So you can have a technology and talent barrier to entry for a couple of years as you transition to something more durable over the longer term. We've seen a number of companies raise hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. And then because they either struggled with some of the resource needs like compute or capital, or just because it's hard to find a business model in this space, the leaders of those places ended up at one of the hyperscalers. So Adept to AWS, Inflection to Microsoft, and Character AI to Google. And then you have a very large number of other foundation models, many of which are located in different geographies, like Mistral in France, and Cohere in Canada, and AI21 in Israel, and a number in China, that are raising hundreds of millions of dollars as well. And you're building an asset that is very capital intensive, very rapidly depreciating, right? So the model that you built 6 months ago is probably not something that even your own customers are going to use because you have a new version of the model. And the prices are also dropping very quickly. So you go from GPT-3 to GPT-4o mini, and you have a capability increase that's pretty significant, and the price dropped something like 99%-ish, right? So one of the fastest price drops in any technology category in the history of the global macroeconomic system. There's a question that we get asked a lot around, OK, so are the models slowing down in capability? Are they going to stop getting better from here? Or have they already stopped getting better? And I think the answer to that is clearly no. In addition to the actual models, the core models themselves continue to improve. You do see a huge number of new frontiers of improvement. So one of the more interesting ones, I think is underrated, is the new inference time compute capability that many of the frontier labs are working on, but has already been shipped as 0.1 preview from OpenAI. So this, you basically can take, instead of just answering the question right away, the way the models traditionally did, what they do is they can take time to think. And with relatively small amounts of additional spend at inference time, you can see enormous improvements in intelligence that are equivalent to 10x, 100x, 1000x increases in training time capability. So what they do is they break up a problem into steps, and they can figure out a plan for the problem. Then for each of the steps, they can evaluate the quality of that step, like how good of a job did I do on it. And then they can, if they go down a dead end, they can go back and they can correct their steps. So this takes a little bit more time. It's more expensive. But for problems that are important, it unlocks a huge amount of capability. So there were a number of interesting discoveries around things like poker playing AI systems and even AlphaGo, where the real magic happened when they gave them time to think, right? If they just had, this is true for human poker players as well, right? If they have a hard problem, they don't respond instantaneously. They think about it. I should also mention the multimodal capabilities. This is everything from voice modalities, where the systems are trained on native voice tokens, and then they can generate native voice tokens. So they're not taking text, taking your voice, converting it to text, sending the text as a prompt, then getting a text response, and then turning that text back into voice. There is voice tokens being embedded in the same latent space as the text tokens. So you can talk to it, you can interrupt it, it can do different emotions. It's like much more like a real conversation. But there's also video, live streaming video capabilities, which are taking snapshots of images and sending them in kind of a real-time API kind of way. So many capabilities like this that will both have impacts at training time and new capabilities will get unlocked at runtime. What we're seeing across our portfolio is a number of important sources of economic power emerge. One is if you're a category-leading incumbent with a product that customers love and get a lot of value from, that product fused together with the Gen AI tools can sometimes create something new that is much more ambitious and bigger than the underlying product itself, but that requires the underlying product to work. So I think we've all seen some of this from large players, right? You see the large high-growth incumbents add Gen AI features and then charge incremental money for them, sometimes multiples of the amount of the underlying product. And it's, the Gen AI tool can use the underlying product as a tool and vice versa. So that's one advantage that some existing incumbents have. Another is distribution, right? You have thousands of existing customers, and you can light them up with your new features. Another is trust in brand. I think we can all relate to this. Like if you use Gmail for your personal email, you might bias towards the Gemini offering in Gmail from Google versus letting some startup have access to the system that you use to reset your passwords or if you have private conversations and things like that. So there's a business version of that where trust is very important. And then access to proprietary data, which is not so much just the data you have as a company, although as a software vendor, although that may be useful. It's also customers are storing data in your system already, right? It might be cybersecurity data or fraud prevention data, or if it's some sort of system of record, they might store patient data in the system. And so that's useful because it's already there. We have a number of companies that have done this, shipped stuff into production. CentralReach, I think, is a really good example because they're not primarily an AI company. They're like an electronic medical record system and a practice management system that sells to autism treatment clinics. And I just was keynoting at their customer event. The customers were raving about their AI products. Like and they've been charging incremental amounts for them. And it's going to be a huge portion of their net new ARR this year. So they grew over 10x over our hold period. We invested a couple years back. And the suite of half a dozen AI capabilities do everything from auto-documenting session notes, automatically creating claims, checking the claims, all sorts of different things, right? Scheduling. So these are features that require their underlying product to work, but are very powerful. And like when the customers use them, they feel magical to them. Quantimetric, you heard from Mario, similar dynamic whereby you can unlock the ability to call a call center, and instead of how can I help you, it's like, oh, I see that you're trying to check out and you didn't notice the checkbox below the fold on the page. Right, completely different experience than was possible before, but requires Quantimetric to work. That said, there is a kind of incumbent that is not a category-leading incumbent with products that customers love, but rather an incumbent where the customers really dislike the product. Okay, so why? And in their business model, sometimes like we're going to raise prices on the customers and we're going to cut costs. And this is a surprisingly large portion of the software industry is in this state in some form. Now, why does that work? Well, it works often because of some variation of switching costs. What are switching costs? Well, there are things like it's hard to rewrite all this code that I built on the system, or I have my data in this format and it's hard to get it out of the system and put it into some other place. Or there's this like big monolithic thing and I have to like refactor into microservices, and these things are all really hard. They're hard to automate. If you do them, they need to be perfect. And at the end of the day, you only get a new thing that does the same thing as your old thing, so is it really worth it, right? And so this, there's companies that have this products that have lasted for decades with this model. Now, we haven't seen a huge amount of evidence of this yet, but one thing we may start to see as we get into phase 2 is a dramatic erosion of switching costs in some areas. Not in all areas, so some switching costs are very durable, but the diligence work involved in thinking about this problem is not simply looking at historical retention rates, asking customers how hard has it historically been to move off of your product. You need to really get into the weeds from a technology perspective to understand and underwrite the potential for not the current version, but the next version of some of these models to cause the switching costs to erode. And then, and this is the companies that are particularly vulnerable are the ones who have products that customers really do not like, and then but are using anyway, right? And then the other thing that we may see, although we haven't seen a huge amount of this yet, is okay, the existing product that you have is just not useful. It's not the way it's going to be done anymore, right? So yes, you have an existing product that in theory could be combined with the Gen AI feature, and they can use each other as tools. But no one's going to do that because there's just a new way you would do that, right? For example, during the mobile transition, like if you had a legacy taxi dispatch company, that incumbency did not give you an advantage when Uber came on the scene, right? It was just not helpful. There was just like a completely new way it was being done. You start with a blank sheet of paper in a given sector, and you say, how should this be done now? And the answer may be, there's a new way to do it now that the AI works. And I think you'll see all sorts of new shaped companies. So from a theory of the firm perspective, you'll see increased vertical integration People are calling this service as a software, where you just, instead of the AI company selling AI as a product, they just become a company in that sector. And they wear an insurance company costume and they go to work, the AI company does. Or you may see much less vertically integrated capabilities, but that are pretty disruptive, right? Like there's a new way to do, we have this product, it was just storing information, and now there's a new way to do it where we just like dynamically gather the information and present it to you or something like that. There is a question we get a lot, which is, okay, so will customers stop buying software entirely and just build all their software themselves? Because now it would be free. To borrow a concept from open source software, yes, it could be free, but it's kind of free like a free puppy in the sense of like, you're not responsible for this thing, right? You have to maintain it and improve it. If it's a fairly complex piece of software, that's pretty hard. And you're doing this in the face of relentless technology change, right? It's not free like a free beer where it's like, here's a beer, this is awesome, right? That said, I don't think it's easy. I don't think you want to be cavalier about this, because as a software vendor, even if the customers are not going to do things themselves in every case, there may be software categories where your category does not make sense anymore, and no one will ever buy that again. And you are seeing companies, like even there's some publicly traded companies where you've seen like 98% stock declines because the whole thing doesn't make sense anymore, right? And that can happen even just based on the raw capabilities of the models themselves, right? The fact that you can now like learn a language by chatting with your ChatGPT app for $20 a month, and it can coach you on your accent and your grammar, and it can just talk with you, and it can do like simultaneous translation, right? So every time a new capability comes out, so one of the things we've been doing with our portfolio companies is saying, okay, today you may feel very confident that your product is the kind of product that is very durable, right? If the models get better, your product whole capabilities get better, which is great. You might want to have somebody as like a red team person whose job it is to test to see how hard it would be to reproduce some meaty and substantive portion of your product using a foundation model. Sort of like what May was talking about earlier, how her prior company, somebody non-technical was able to produce the entire company very quickly using foundation models. So we've been dividing our support for our portfolio companies into two categories through Insight Onsite. One is what we're calling efficient scaling. So this is using generative AI internally, so for things like software development and product marketing. This is hard, as in, like, you may be able to get, say, a 25% productivity improvement in software development for the actual engineers, but things very quickly re-bottleneck in other areas. And this is true for most large companies. I think we've seen a lot of companies do this thing where they build an internal chatbot that's kind of like not a good user experience that connects to an API on the back end that's one of the foundation models, and then no one uses it because it's not good, right? Whereas if maybe if they subscribed to Anthropic Enterprise or NotebookLM for Business or Open ChatGPT Enterprise, they would use it and it would get better more quickly. So we've been building out a lot of capability around helping our companies there. And then product strategy is even more complex. This is how do you fuse these capabilities into your products. And there's everything from like how do you do product management in this new world where you don't know what anything is, like computers in like 2 months are going to be able to do things that computers have never been able to do before, right? So like how do you build a product strategy in that world? And you know that it's going to come out maybe, or you have a hint, but you don't know, is it going to be 60% accurate or is it going to be 99% accurate? And the kind of product you can build around that is completely different. And then just brass tacks things, like how do you do retrieval augmented generation? What kind of vector, should I use my existing databases, vector similarity search layer, or a pure play vector database, and things like that. So there's a lot of hunger for guidance and support, and so we've been building this out as well. And then finally, I'll just end with, as we go longer term, there will be very important threshold effects. So these are things where, as the model capabilities increase, it stops being like a minor efficiency improvement and starts to become like a phase change, like ice turning to water, where the model gets so good that there used to be people in the elevator who had these sticks, and they would stop the elevator at a specific place and then you get out. And then the elevator computers got good enough that you don't have, if you saw somebody with a stick in the elevator now, you'd be like, whoa, let me get in a different elevator. And so that can happen in many more domains, right? Like when does it become malpractice to let the human do this medical task, right? Because the computer is so much better. And those phase changes are often major threshold effects. And then finally, I think the major open question is how long will it be before the models stop getting better or slow down in how quickly they're getting better? It's very different if that happens in 2 years versus 5 years versus 15 years. This is true for growth in general, right? Like if a company grows at 50% a year for 10 years, it's 50 times larger. If it grows at 50% a year for 20 years, it's 3,000 times larger. But the real question is like, this is a known unknown, and so what you want to do is build a strategy that's robust to this pace of improvement. So thank you.
A compact world in our hands. From then to now, we've